Alcohol may make the body feel warm, but it also causes the dilation of blood vessels. It can also affect Dennis's judgment about the need to get out of that cold water.
When news broke of the Wilson brothers' sudden death, the public barely had time to process the shock before whispers began swirling. But now, with the autopsy report finally made public, things just got a whole lot stranger. This isn't your typical case of a Hollywood tragedy. What the medical examiners found has left even seasoned investigators scratching their heads. Hidden substances, unexplained markings, and a timeline that doesn't quite add up. So what really happened in those final hours? Stick around, because this story is far from ordinary. Dennis Wilson's final dive. A face bruised, a body drifting beneath cold December waves, and a rock legend chasing ghosts beneath the surface. This isn't how anyone expected the story of Dennis Wilson to end. The only true surfer in the Beach Boys, the band that defined California's sun-soaked dreams, found himself slipping silently into the very ocean that had once inspired their most iconic songs. In the late afternoon of December 28, 1983, Wilson jumped into the water near Marina del Rey, Los Angeles. But this wasn't a carefree swim. He was searching, diving repeatedly, trying to recover personal items that had been thrown overboard years earlier during a heated moment with his estranged wife, Shawn Love, who also happened to be the daughter of his cousin and bandmate, Mike Love. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. America's golden surfer, drowning in the same waters that had made him famous, all while reaching for remnants of a past he couldn't let go. Those who were with him that day, aboard a boat named the Emerald, claimed he surfaced after one dive, saying he'd spotted a box on the ocean floor and needed a rope. They handed it to him. He disappeared again. This time he didn't come back. It took just 30 minutes for Harbor Patrol to find his body. But what came after? The autopsy, the toxicology report, the whispers of violence and addiction painted a much darker picture than anyone was prepared for. Just 3 days earlier, on Christmas, Wilson had reportedly tried to reconnect with Shawn at a hotel nearby. But instead of reconciliation, the visit ended in a violent confrontation. A friend of hers allegedly beat him severely, leaving him with facial injuries, damage to his chin, his nose, and just above his left eye. While the coroner later confirmed these weren't fatal, they hinted at the chaos Wilson was living in during his final days. That chaos wasn't new. Years earlier, he had been entangled with Charles Manson. Yes, that Charles Manson, and had introduced harmful substance into his life. His spiral was fast and brutal. The autopsy revealed a cocktail of substances in his system: codeine, morphine, barbiturates, and enough alcohol to push him well past the legal limit. His blood alcohol level was a staggering 0.26%. Combine that with frigid water temperatures just above 58 degrees, and it becomes hauntingly clear. Dennis wasn't just fighting the current, he was fighting everything. He died at 39. A man forever tied to the waves, but ultimately pulled under by demons far more powerful than the surf. Now, let's rewind the tide to the days, the decisions, and the haunting moments that led to his death, and the chilling discoveries revealed in his autopsy report. Dennis Wilson, the surfer who drowned in fame. He had the looks, the charm, and the wild spark of rebellion. But behind Dennis Wilson's Beach Boy grin lived a storm that even the ocean couldn't calm. Before fame left him adrift, Dennis was the only Beach Boy who actually lived the life the band sang about. While his brothers Brian and Carl stayed close to the studio, and cousin Mike Love kept the group's image polished, Dennis rode the waves, sped through California in fast cars, and chased the sun with raw, unfiltered energy. He wasn't just performing a role, he was the image the world fell in love with. But that image came at a cost. Born in 1944 in Hawthorne, California, Dennis was thrown into music through family obligation rather than personal ambition. When their mother Audrey insisted Dennis be included in the band his brothers were forming, they handed him a pair of drumsticks, more out of convenience than faith in his talent. Still, Dennis taught himself to play. His drumming wasn't technical, but it was passionate, and he brought a unique edge to the Beach Boys' harmonies. Despite this, he was often seen as the band's wild card, the one who never quite fit their clean-cut mold. The Beach Boys shot to fame in the early 60s alongside British giants like the Beatles, with hits like Surfin' USA and Good Vibrations. But as their golden era faded, so did the harmony behind the scenes. While Brian Wilson was praised as a musical genius, Dennis's creative contributions were often overlooked, used, but rarely celebrated. By the mid-1970s, the tension had thickened. The group refused to evolve, still singing about surfboards and teenage dreams, while Dennis pushed for deeper, more personal music. Frustrated and stifled, he poured his soul into a solo project. In 1977, Pacific Ocean Blue hit shelves, and critics were stunned. The same Dennis, who had been treated as the group's party boy, was now being compared to Lennon, Springsteen, and Bowie. His voice was gritty, his lyrics aching with beauty and regret. But just as quickly as his solo star began to rise, it dimmed. A second album stalled. His voice, once gravelly and powerful, deteriorated until he could barely sing. Harmful substance, alcohol, and heartbreak chipped away at what was left. By 1983, Dennis was untethered. Estranged from his fifth wife, Shawn Love, daughter of cousin and bandmate Mike Love, he no longer had a home. The boat they lived on had been repossessed. His relationship with his brothers had fractured. He had 5 children and no anchor. In late December, he checked into St. John's Medical Center in Los Angeles, hoping to start fresh. But that spark of redemption was short-lived. He wasn't really in the Beach Boys anymore. He wasn't really in anyone's life. As one close source put it, he was lost. Beneath the ruins of his life, Dennis clung to memories, both painful and bittersweet. He returned to Marina del Rey, where Shawn once threw his belongings into the ocean. Now, he dove into the cold water, searching not just for lost objects, but for pieces of a past no one else could see. So, what exactly did he found? Let's keep watching. The voice that faded before the man. But Dennis's downfall wasn't just in the water. It had started years earlier, quietly, with smoke in his lungs and silence growing in his throat. He picked up smoking back in high school, when cigarettes were more fashionable than warning labels. His track coach tried everything, even forcing him to run laps daily, until he agreed to quit. But Dennis never promised, and he definitely never quit. He preferred the harshest kind, non-filtered, and soon it became part of his image. The wild, windswept rebel with a cigarette always hanging from his mouth. But that image came at a cost. By the late 70s, the damage was obvious. Singing became difficult, sometimes painful. He strained to hit notes, and even everyday conversations grew hard. The timing couldn't have been worse. Just as his solo career was catching attention and offering a new outlet for all the feelings he'd buried beneath the Beach Boys' sugary harmonies, his voice began slipping away. It wasn't just a physical loss. It was emotional, personal. Dennis had finally found his own sound, raw and unpolished, reflecting a life filled with heartache, rebellion, and longing. Then suddenly, he could barely speak, let alone sing. For a man like Dennis, who poured his soul into music, that silence was devastating. Creative expression had always been his escape, a way to process pain, disconnection, and disappointment. Losing that lifeline meant losing a piece of himself. And for someone already spiraling, that loss became another weight, dragging him further down. He wasn't just fading from the charts, he was fading from himself. And while the world still saw a sun-tanned rebel, Dennis was quietly drowning long before his final dive, the chaos behind the charm. Among the Beach Boys, Dennis was the unpredictable one. He did everything louder, faster, and harder than the rest. His spontaneity was legendary, racing cars under a fake name just to dodge the band's strict Capitol Records contract that forbade risky activities like surfing and motorcycles. He broke those rules often and proudly. At one point, he even held drag racing records because slowing down wasn't in his vocabulary. But while the scars on his body came from danger and thrill, the ones buried deeper told a darker story. Murray Wilson, Dennis's father and the band's first manager, was infamous for his harsh discipline and volatile temper. Dennis often shared that one of his earliest childhood memories wasn't of music or laughter, but being flung across the room by his father's rage. Growing up in a house where love was conditional and approval came with cruelty, Dennis learned early to measure his worth by chaos. And like many who suffer childhood trauma, he grew into a man constantly questioning whether he deserved peace, stability, or love at all. So he filled the silence with noise: alcohol, adrenaline, women, danger. As a child, he couldn't escape his father's abuse. As an adult, he couldn't escape himself. On December 24, 1983, Dennis was just one day into what was meant to be a 21-day stay at a detox center in Los Angeles. It wasn't his first attempt at sobriety, but the restlessness had already set in. He couldn't sit still, couldn't slow down. Known for always carrying a juice jug, usually orange or grapefruit, spiked heavily with rum or vodka, he'd sometimes pour half the real juice down the drain right outside the liquor store, replacing it instantly with hard alcohol. It was more than habit. It was ritual, survival, escape. And like everything else in his life, even trying to quit came with a crash course in excess. But what chance does healing have when addiction, trauma, and a broken identity are pulling him under? Stay glued to your screen. Demons in the Depths, what Dennis couldn't escape. By Christmas Day, 1983, just 2 days after checking himself into a Los Angeles detox center, Dennis Wilson had already walked out. Instead of recovery, he returned to the bottle, spending the holiday drinking alone near Marina del Rey, the harbor he knew like the back of his sunburned hand. But this time, the water wouldn't let him go. Despite being an experienced swimmer and sailor, Dennis's body was pulled from the shallow waters of the marina on December 28th. He was just 39. To those who knew him, it didn't make sense. Dennis had been in those waters countless times. He surfed, sailed, dove. He lived in the ocean. So how could he drown in barely 12 feet of water? That question still echoes today. What investigators did know was that Dennis had been drinking again. Forensic experts confirmed that alcohol was in his system. And then there were the bruises. When he was pulled from the water, Dennis's face showed signs of serious trauma: dark bruises, swelling, and wounds inconsistent with a simple drowning. It was enough to raise alarms. Some suspected foul play. The homicide division was called. The public, fueled by decades of Dennis's unpredictable lifestyle, couldn't help but question: Was this really an accident? Part of that suspicion came from a chapter of Dennis's life many preferred to forget: his disturbing connection with Charles Manson. Long before the world knew Manson as a sadistic cult leader, Dennis had welcomed him and his so-called family into his home. What began as a music collaboration quickly turned into something darker. Dennis recorded one of Manson's songs, Never Learn Not to Love, but released it under the Beach Boys' name and made changes without crediting Manson. That betrayal sparked fury. Manson, furious over the altered lyrics and lack of credit, confronted Dennis and issued a chilling warning. Holding up a bullet, he allegedly told Dennis it could be meant for one of his children if he didn't cooperate. Terrified, Dennis cut all ties with Manson. And later that year, the nation would come to know the full horror of what Manson was capable of as his followers carried out 9 gruesome deaths in Los Angeles. Dennis never spoke openly about that chapter again. Friends said he buried it, trying to forget, haunted by guilt and fear. It was a memory that followed him, silently, long after Manson's arrest. And while police quickly ruled out homicide in Dennis's case, the violence that had once brushed so close to him still lingered in the shadows of his final days. His early years had already set the stage. Growing up in the high-energy spotlight of 1960s California, Dennis started drinking young. Success came quickly with the Beach Boys, but so did a dangerous kind of freedom. At an age when most teens still needed permission, Dennis had liquor, money, fame, and no one to say no. What started as rebellion soon turned into dependency. Haunted by deep emotional scars, especially from his controlling, abusive father Murray, Dennis became a storm in waiting. Experts often point to childhood trauma as the root of adult addiction, and Dennis fit the pattern. Plagued by shame, self-doubt, and the need to prove himself, he drank not for pleasure, but to silence the chaos within. And what did that growing storm ultimately destroy? Just his career, or something far deeper? Stay glued. Inside the body of a Beach Boy. The first clues. That inner storm followed Dennis to the end. When Dennis's lifeless body was pulled from Marina del Rey Harbor in December 1983, one chilling question echoed. How could a man so at home in the water, a skilled surfer and strong swimmer, drown in barely 15 feet of it? Enter Dr. Michael Hunter, a world-renowned forensic pathologist. With over 20 years of experience and thousands of autopsies under his belt, even he wasn't ready for what Dennis's body would reveal. From the outside, Dennis appeared healthy for a 39-year-old man, toned, athletic, and built like someone who had spent his life in motion. At first glance, there was no clear, immediate reason why his body would fail him so suddenly in a familiar environment. But the deeper Dr. Hunter looked, the more unsettling questions emerged. Dennis's body told stories written in scars, far more than what you'd expect from a musician. Many of them were jagged, some oddly shaped, scattered across his skin like markers of a chaotic life. Were they the result of reckless stunts, alcohol-fueled accidents, or remnants from a rough childhood? Whatever their origin, one thing was clear. They were old. None contributed directly to his death, but they hinted at years of physical turmoil. There was more. A close look at his internal organs revealed an enlarged liver with significant fatty deposits. While Dennis wasn't diabetic, this condition often points to chronic alcohol use. And given his well-known drinking habits, often described as excessive, even dangerous, it strongly suggested that alcohol played a major role in what unfolded that day in the harbor. If Dennis had been drinking before diving in, it would have impacted his coordination, reaction time, and even his ability to stay afloat. All critical factors, especially in cold water. And then there was his voice. Dr. Hunter noted the damage to Dennis's vocal cords, likely from years of smoking and strain. Friends had recalled how difficult it had become for him to sing or even speak in the months before his death. It was one more reminder of a body worn down not just by lifestyle, but by years of emotional and physical weight. And what hidden truth in the toxicology report could finally explain the mystery behind his death? Stay glued to your screen. Unraveling the chemistry of a tragedy. That same search for emotional balance may also explain what was silently tearing Dennis apart from the inside. As Dr. Michael Hunter delved deeper into Dennis Wilson's toxicology report, a clearer picture began to form, one that raised more questions than answers. The first red flag was his blood alcohol content. A staggering 0.26%, more than triple the legal driving limit in most U.S. states. For most people, that level of intoxication would make walking a challenge, let alone diving into a harbor. Alcohol dulls reflexes, impairs coordination, and strips away the ability to respond quickly. Dangerous on land, but potentially fatal in water. But this wasn't new for Dennis. He had been drinking heavily for years and had swum under the influence more times than anyone could count. What made this time different? The toxicology results might hold the answer. Alongside alcohol, tests were conducted for a wide range of substances that, according to those close to him, Dennis frequently used. His history of repeated detox attempts, check-ins at medical centers, and long stays in hospitals painted a grim portrait of a man constantly battling his inner demons. If he had consumed any combination of these harmful substances with alcohol, the risks would have been amplified dramatically. Muscle weakness, confusion, and suppressed breathing, all critical while swimming, could easily have led to disaster. But it wasn't just the chemicals in his blood that puzzled investigators, it was what was found on his face. When his body was pulled from Marina del Rey, Dennis had visible bruises on his face, serious enough to involve the homicide division. That's not standard for accidental drownings. Yet, despite how bad they looked, the autopsy found nothing fatal. No skull fractures, no brain trauma, nothing that could have knocked him unconscious. Painful? Yes, but not lethal. Then came a curious detail. Valium. Family and friends claimed Dennis had taken the anti-anxiety medicine just days before his death. It would have made sense for someone under such crushing stress, but toxicology showed no trace. If he took it at all, the dose was too low to leave a mark. And that raised a deeper question. If he wasn't showing panic attacks, why reach for it in the first place? As the mystery deepened, both in his body and in his choices that night, one thing became clear. This story is far from over. So stay with us, because what comes next might change everything. Dennis' Christmas confrontation. But as the investigation peeled back more layers, it became clear that Dennis's last days weren't only haunted by addiction, they were also wrapped in heartbreak. On the evening of December 25, 1983, after a day of heavy drinking, Dennis made his way to the Santa Monica Bay Inn. He wasn't looking for another party. He was looking for Sean. Their relationship had always been rocky, made even more unstable by Dennis's alcohol abuse and erratic behavior. Still, he wanted to believe they could fix things. He wanted to be present for their newborn son, Gage, in ways he hadn't been for his older children. Maybe Christmas could be a new beginning. But when Dennis arrived, the scene that met him shattered any such hope. Sean was with another man. For someone as impulsive and emotionally raw as Dennis, Jealousy wasn't just a feeling, it was a fuse. Confronting them without hesitation, the situation turned violent. A fight broke out. Dennis, already intoxicated and emotionally unstable, didn't back down. But this time, he came out of it badly beaten, struck over the head by the other man. It was messy, humiliating, and deeply painful, not just physically but emotionally too. In the early hours of December 26th, around 3:30 a.m., Dennis stumbled into another medical facility, seeking help for his injuries. He looked broken, inside and out. His face bore the visible marks of the fight, but the deeper wounds were harder to see. That night had taken something else from him, maybe his last shred of hope. Those final days with Sean had mirrored the wider unraveling of Dennis's life. Their relationship, once promising, had dissolved into chaos. And Dennis himself was dissolving with it, losing grip, losing direction, and now losing time. And what drove Dennis to walk out of the hospital and back into the waters that would soon claim him? Stay glued to your screen. Dennis's final dive. The following day, just a day before his death, Dennis Wilson checked himself out of the hospital once again. He was supposed to stay longer, to recover, to rest. But instead, he returned to familiar waters, Marina del Rey, seeking comfort on a friend's boat. That friend, Bill Oster, had always offered Dennis a place to crash, and that's exactly what he needed. A temporary home in the only place that still felt like one. Despite the calm of the marina, Dennis's mind was anything but. Years of childhood trauma, unstable relationships, financial missteps, and deep addiction had left him emotionally worn down. Panic attacks weren't new to him. They had followed him from childhood, sometimes striking so hard he had to be removed from Beach Boys tours and hospitalized. The physical symptoms were overwhelming. His heart would race, his vision would blur, and everything else faded into a suffocating fog of fear and sadness. Things weren't going well. The Beach Boys had pushed him away. Too many chances wasted. His boat, the Harmony, had been repossessed by the bank, symbolizing a final loss of peace. His marriage to Sean had crumbled, and though he loved their newborn son Gage, Dennis was emotionally fractured. That very boat, the Harmony, had once been his safe haven. Losing it hit harder than most realized. By the morning of December 28th, he had spent the night aboard Bill's boat. Around 3 p.m., Dennis had lunch and mentioned he wanted to dive. He believed some sentimental items, once thrown into the harbor during a fight with ex-wife Karen Lamb, were still down there. Among the chaos of their love, Karen had remained an ideal in Dennis's heart. He dove into the cold water searching for keepsakes from a life that had slipped away. And around 3:20 p.m., he emerged holding a picture frame that once held their photo. The water was freezing, but he didn't stop. Then, at 4:15 p.m., Dennis Wilson was seen alive for the last time, heading back into the water for one final dive. And just like that, the water that once gave Dennis peace turned silent. Half an hour in, and no one had seen him surface. The final clue from the autopsy result. Bill Oster, sensing something wasn't right, alerted the harbor patrol at 4:30 p.m. By 5:30 p.m., they found Dennis Wilson's body at the bottom of Marina del Rey Harbor, right where the Harmony, his cherished boat, used to be moored. He was pronounced dead on the spot. His family, not wanting cremation, arranged a sea burial off the California coast on January 4, 1984, made possible by a rare presidential dispensation from Ronald Reagan. But how did a man known for his strength in the water, a real surfer among musicians, drown in a harbor barely 15 feet deep? Dr. Michael Hunter, a seasoned forensic pathologist, examined every angle. Witnesses confirmed that Dennis hadn't intended to end his life that day. So the autopsy focused on what factors could have made such a strong swimmer so vulnerable. One possibility was the cold. California waters may look inviting, but in late December, they hover around 58 degrees. While alcohol can trick the body into feeling warm, it actually accelerates heat loss. Hypothermia can quietly disable organs, cause confusion, and even led to unconsciousness. Still, from body temperature readings and the timeline, Dennis hadn't been submerged long enough for that to be the sole cause. His blood alcohol content, however, told a different story: 0.26%, more than 3 times the legal limit. He was no stranger to swimming drunk, but something this time was different. No harmful substance was confirmed in fatal levels, though the potential for interaction still lingered. The real clue was far more specific: shallow water blackout. It's rare, but deadly. Often found in strong swimmers, it happens when hyperventilation tricks the body into suppressing the urge to breathe. Dennis, likely trying to stay under longer to search for personal items lost years earlier, might have taken deep, rapid breaths before diving. This caused his carbon dioxide levels to drop, silencing the body's natural breathe reflex. His brain, starved of oxygen, would have fainted without warning. No struggle, no pain, just sudden, silent unconsciousness in less than 15 feet of water. His cold surroundings would have only worsened things: rapid oxygen use, slowed reaction time, and poor decision-making under the influence. What began as a sentimental dive for a memory turned tragic. The final conclusion? A fatal accident fueled by shallow water blackout and intoxication. And yet, what haunted his loved ones most wasn't just how he died, but how deeply he lived. The legacy of Dennis Wilson and a cautionary reminder. Dennis Wilson's story is one of brilliance, heartbreak, and an insatiable appetite for life. He wasn't just the drummer for the Beach Boys. He was their raw, untamed spirit. The only real surfer in the group, Dennis embodied California's ocean-soaked dream. Yet beneath the sun-kissed surface was a man constantly battling his past, addictions, and aching need for belonging. The autopsy revealed a man physically strong, but emotionally fragile. Someone who had survived trauma, heartbreak, and years of substance abuse, only to be claimed by the very water he once called home. His death at 39 was not a deliberate act, but a tragic accident caused by shallow water blackout, an often overlooked and highly dangerous phenomenon that can strike even the most experienced swimmers and divers. It occurs when hyperventilation before a dive artificially lowers carbon dioxide levels in the body, silencing the urge to breathe. The result is a sudden loss of consciousness underwater, with no warning signs. In Dennis's case, his impaired judgment from alcohol made it even easier for the condition to take hold. What makes shallow water blackouts particularly devastating is its quiet nature. There's no splashing, no call for help, just sudden stillness. Experts estimate that dozens of swimmers and divers around the world die each year from it. Though many cases are misclassified or misunderstood, victims are often strong athletes, lifeguards, or free divers, people who feel most comfortable in the water. In Dennis's memory, and for countless others, awareness is crucial. Education around breath hold safety, the dangers of hyperventilation, and the influence of alcohol or harmful substance before swimming must be amplified. Organizations like Shallow Water Blackout Prevention and the U.S. Swim School Association have made strides in spreading awareness, but more must be done. Dennis left behind a legacy not just of music, but of vulnerability, intensity, and the reminder that even the wildest spirits have limits. So, what do you think truly claimed Dennis' life? Was it the science of shallow water blackout, or something far more personal beneath the surface? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe.